Oof, I'm never gonna get tired of seeing that. Jason paused in the act of peeling off his jumpsuit, as he heard a distinctly feminine voice in an area that was very much not supposed to have any feminine presence at all. Specifically, the male showers. Well, male was a bit of a misnomer. Up until the term first had occupied the gentle river, they had just been changing rooms. A Shavanti regiment didn't usually have enough men in attendance that having segregated changing areas was anyway economically viable. Instead, said men would just have to suck it up and deal with the leering. Which was little different from basic training, really. Or they could make use of the no doubt standing offer to use the officers' showering area, because, of course, the officers had their own showering area, still communal, but undoubtedly nicer than those used by the enlisted. Of course, the term first did have men. A lot of them. A lot of women too, which meant that the showering areas that had been previously divided by officer and enlisted had been switched to male and female, with the ladies taking what had previously been the officers' showering area. Which had caused some grumbling about favouritism, before it had been quite reasonably pointed out that the remaining officers aboard the regiment were almost universally women. More to the point, the officers' shower had less shower heads per square inch of space, which meant that, if it had been given to the more populous male side of the regiment, they would have had to either share shower heads, something even a strident naturist might object to, or spend a very long time waiting in line to use them. In the end, reason had won out, grudgingly. Which begged the question, "What the fuck are you doing in here?" Jason asked, whirling around to face Frisker. Something he wasn't alone in. He'd finally managed to wriggle into one of the regiment's shipboard training exercises, and had just been getting ready to shower off after, hopefully, managing to put in a decent enough showering. Which meant that showers were currently occupied by a good chunk of 2nd Company's 3rd Platoon. Though few had been quite as vocal as him, he hadn't been the only one to speak. "I just came down to ask if you're the reason why my company has stopped acting like a bunch of scorned ex-wives," Frisker said, eyes obviously panning around the room, and I figured I'd check in on the status of the troops while I was down here. Jason frowned at the complete lack of professionalism. "Well, you've checked now, ma'am. Give me a few minutes and I'll be able to speak to you." The purple woman seemed surprised by his irritation, which of course only irritated him further. Still, she thankfully chose not to say anything else before slipping back out, though not without one final glance at the array of naked bodies on display. Silence reigned in the showers, broken only by a continual spray of water. Finally, someone said what they were all thinking. "Fucking perps." Or almost everybody. "I don't know," another Marine responded. "I kinda like it when a woman's clear about what she wants." "What she wants isn't on offer," the first responded. "We're Marines, not eye candy. It's infuriating. I mean, for fuck's sake, all I want is just a few minutes to myself without being ogled." "What are you, gay?" another man sniggered. "Fuck you, Pulaski." To Jason's surprise, it wasn't the first that responded, but another voice that piped in. "Not literally, mind you, I've got higher standards than that." "Fuck you, Grant," Pulaski apparently grunted. Unfazed, Grant continued. "Hell, I don't see what the big deal is. Even if I'm not interested, a guy can appreciate being appreciated. It's not like it costs us anything." "Dignity, pride, privacy," the as of yet unnamed first voice muttered. And was swiftly ignored as a Marine with a Canadian accent felt the need to add his 2 cents. "I guess I can understand that. I mean, I feel that I'm a good-looking guy, but the only girl I ever remember calling me handsome was my grandma. Not since the perp showed up. Now I know I apparently have gorgeous blue eyes too." "That has to be the gayest thing I've ever seen or heard," Grant deadpanned. "Fuck all 3 of you," the still unnamed first voice continued. "Can't believe I'm saying this, but I ain't a sack of meat." "I stand corrected," Grant sniped. Only this time the self-proclaimed gay man was the one to be ignored, as New York accent piped up. "I hear you, brother. One more catcall and someone's getting a broken nose." "Y'all are," Pulaski started to say before Jason mentally tuned the man out, wrapping a towel around himself as he strode towards the lockers. It wasn't like the conversation was anything he hadn't heard before, or mentally debated himself. "So you wanted to talk, ma'am?" he asked, as he finally stepped out of the changing rooms, fully dressed now. Which Frisker had been quick to note if her put-upon pout was any indication. Still, she was quick to straighten up, shifting into what Jason was quickly coming to dub her officer face. "No shadows today?" the woman asked, noting the conspicuous absence of both Nora and Yarrow. Jason shrugged. Probably still changing. The captain frowned. "Protocol dictates that one of them should be with you at all times. They are bodyguards after all." Which is complete overkill in any environment that isn't an active war zone, and even more so in a friendly ship in transit. More to the point, it wasn't like any of the officers, sans Clef, were walking around with a perpetual pair of guardians. The only reason he had bodyguards was because it was tradition. And more to the point, protocol dictates that they have to be with me at all times unless given direct orders by a superior officer or me. And you told them to leave you alone? Frisker looked disappointed. Hardly. He wasn't that boneheaded. Even if he thought a rule dictating that he needed at least one bodyguard at all hours was stupid. I just told them to take their time getting changed after the exercise, which Yrrol hasn't been doing over the last week, which means I've been surrounded by the near-perpetual odour of wet dog, something I no longer have the patience to stomach now that I have discovered the reason for it. You chose to have a hole in your protection detail because you couldn't stomach a little smell? She smirked. You men and your delicate noses. For just a second, Jason wondered just how much trouble he'd get into for cum-punting an officer, and if the satisfaction he'd derive from the act would outweigh the punishment he'd incur. A quick mental inventory told him it wouldn't. If only barely, he thought. You wanted to talk with me, ma'am, he reiterated. The alien chuffed in amusement, but magnanimously chose to drop the previous topic, in favour of actually getting to what she'd come to see him about. Well done, she said, straightening up. Well, I don't know the exact details of how you did it. I'm glad to see that my company is finally mixing with the rest of the regiment. He cocked his head. You knew? About the problem, ma'am? The alien favoured him with a look that suggested he might be a little slow. It's my company. Just because us officers have to pretend to be above it all doesn't mean we don't try to be aware of it all. Then why? Didn't I do something about it? She finished for him. He nodded. Because truth be told, the revelation that the officers had been aware of the issues with Fourth Company, but chose to leave it to him to resolve them, well, it was irritating. Which is why he was utterly caught off guard by the woman's response. We didn't know how. He paused. What? Frisker continued. I didn't know how to resolve the issue. It's just not something me or the other officers are used to dealing with. I mean, you tell a bunch of Shovanti to fall in line and they do it. At least so long as they're plebeians. You humans, though? Your whole race seems to love being as contrary as possible, even when it benefits you not at all. Ignorant of Jason's incredulity, the woman continued, as if she was venting all the frustration she'd been feeling this last week. I mean, we're going into a combat environment. One where we all need to work together. More to the point, nearly 3/4 of this regiment is comprised of fresh faces. Yet what do I find my company comprised of skilled veterans doing? Forming their own little secret coven and actively causing dissent amongst the ranks. Idly, Jason glanced up and down the hall to see if anyone was close enough to hear the woman's heated diatribe. There had originally been a few, but it seemed they had gotten wise and scarpered the moment they seen the Shovanti captain Marks, and that Jason was rapidly wishing he could emulate. Fortunately for him, it seemed the alien was slowly calming down after venting. Quietly, the woman took a deep breath before composing herself. My point is, this passive resistance bullshit isn't something we're used to. More to the point, the idea of continuing to fight for something beyond the point where it's in any way beneficial is also new to me, and I imagine the Imperium as a whole. Certainly the occupation of Earth has been a learning experience for us all. Smiling, the woman slapped a massive palm onto his shoulder. So, as I said before I got distracted, I wanted to thank you as a Marine and an officer for coming through and finally putting my company's heads out of their own asses. It might not seem like much, but I think it'll save a lot of lives in the months ahead. Jason nodded slightly before pausing. Don't you mean weeks? That was how long this whole operation was expected to take. Against the roaches? The alien just laughed. You humans might have passive resistance down to an R form, but roaches are the ones who taught us the idea of resistance at all costs. She shrugged. Nah, I'll consider us fortunate if we're finished with this before the new year. Her bit said, the woman strode off, still chuckling to herself, leaving Jason standing in the hall with but one thought in his mind. Shit. They've been here a month and done nothing. Grembling back in her seat as her fellow captain paced back and forth across the floor of the mobile command unit. Oh, what a very nice command unit it is, the woman thought, ignoring Frisker as her eyes roamed over the truly gargantuan vehicle's interior. The MCL-3 was, like much of the regiment's vehicle pool, an outmoded design that had been pulled from mothball as a direct response to Ragnos 3's rather unique weather systems, specifically the nigh-constant storm systems that made flight near impossible and orbital fire a total crapshoot. The same storm system that even now she could hear battering away at the thick outer armour of the vehicle in which she now sat. Of course, annoying as said storms were to her as a commander, she could still appreciate that their presence had turned a vehicle that was considered by many commanders to be little more than an oversized death trap into a rather comfortable means of conveyance. The MCL-3 had originally been designed as a mobile forward command post for divisions or independent regiments. The two-story machine housed a sick bay, a small kitchen, internal power generators, a briefing room, a state-of-the-art war centre, and living quarters for the unit commander. Living quarters contained sufficient amenities that many amongst the military wondered if perhaps the machine had been designed to appeal more to noble commanders, who wished to appear as such, rather than actual serving members of the military. Needless to say, the oversized and overcost machine quickly developed a reputation as a mobile coffin, as the thing's massive presence and slow rate of movement made it an ideal target for airborne or orbital fire. Only a few hundred were made before production was stopped, and the remaining MCL-3s were quickly and quietly rebranded as a command center for disaster relief efforts, and shunted off onto any civilian authority that was willing to receive one. Of course, in true Imperial fashion, the military refused to outright admit that the design was a total failure, and thus had apparently retained at least one, which now found itself in the possession of the Terran First, just the latest in a long line of small sabotages that had plagued the regiment since its inception. Of course, her ruminations on the topic were interrupted, as Friska's datapad clattered noisily across the table. Sighing internally at the woman's lack of composure, she restrained herself to raising a single eyebrow at her. "I'd hardly say they've done nothing," Gremp allowed, playing the Deep One's advocate. "According to these reports, the 198th clashed with the terrorists just this morning." Friska glared at her. "An isolated firefight between a patrol and an unknown number of attackers isn't a clash, especially when the roaches were the ones to initiate." Despite herself, Gremp nodded as she slowly picked up the discarded data slate, picking over the details in the report. "It does certainly seem like our fellow regiments have been content to cede the initiative to the enemy." "Because they're terrified of moving beyond the drop holes." Claire's voice rang out as the woman herself stepped into the command room, carelessly shrugging her rain-soaked coat off as she went. An act which forced the champion, who had been trailing behind her, to rapidly catch it, lest the soap material hit the floor. Not ladylike at all. Graham couldn't help but think irritably about the tricky woman, even as she and Friska rapidly stood up and saluted, something the colonel barely acknowledged as he moved to sit at the head of the briefing table. "Both of my fellow colonels are hidebound fools who seem completely incapable or unwilling to adapt to the unique conditions presented by Arachnos 3. I take it that the meeting with your contemporaries did not go well, ma'am," Friska added. The colonel's antenna twitched spasmodically. Something Graham was rapidly discovering was a show of irritation. The pair of them were more interested in hitting on our champion than working out a plan for striking the mining stations. Well, even if she didn't agree with it, Graham could well understand that temptation. As he stood attentively in the corner of the room, this Jason made for a rather delectable specimen, not just as a result of his looks either. His accomplishments at Gurathu meant the human was storied enough that a lady would not be considered going below her station by going after him. At least as a second husband, Graham conceded. The first would have to be a proper shill of proper station. But that was just good business. For fun, though, she thought, as her eyes roamed the masculine alien's tight bodysuit. Whatever issues she might have had with humans as a species, the attractiveness of their males wasn't one of them. "It's not too surprising," Friska said finally. "Conventional strategy suggests the use of orbital fire to engage an enemy when it's available, and to actively avoid engagement when it's not." "I'm well aware," Clef droned dryly. "The issue is that our compatriots in arms seem completely unwilling or unable to grasp that orbital support is not, nor will it ever be, available on Arachnos 3. Thus they actively have to close with and engage the enemy, even if it runs contrary to the normal way of doing things." Friska shrugged. "I know that. Imagine they know that too. Still, it's difficult for some people to act a certain way when just about every facet of their training and experience tells them to do the opposite." Graham felt she needed to get her own piece in, lest her fellow captain be seen as the only contributor in their superiors' eyes. With that in mind, it is not a total surprise that the 198th as well as the 312th are both sticking to the drop holes where the rules of engagement are at least normal. Clef snorted before her attention shifted. "Lieutenant Avila, how long until we can move?" The sudden question from the colonel elicited a small squeak from the thus far silent third person in the room, so silent that Graham had honestly forgotten that Plumwoman was present, a sentiment echoed by her fellow captain, if the slight widening of Friska's eyes was to be believed. "Well, the rest of the equipment should be offloaded within the next 2 hours. Clef grinned. "Great. That means we will still have enough daylight to—" "Actually, ma'am," Avila interrupted, her leaves turning a deep yellow, "I have an advisory from Captain Clef from Medical." The colonel looked affronted, but eventually waved for the plumwoman to continue. Leaves switching to green in relief, the lieutenant continued. "He specified that the sensory readings we received while on Shill were not entirely correct, or at least not applicable. While it is true that much of the planet has Shill-equivalent oxygen levels, the area we are expected to be operating in is raised, and thus the air is thinner than anticipated. To that end, he suggested the troops will need a day to acclimate." Clef made an audible clicking sound, but eventually the colonel relented. Probably for the best, the alien funny allowed. We probably need to change our plans to accommodate our sister regiment's complete lack of initiative. Leaning forward in her seat, the tricky woman's gaze turned distinctly predatory. But make no mistake, ladies. Tomorrow we start showing these roaches that a whole new breed of predator has shown up on Ragnos Free. Everyone present nodded, though Graham couldn't help but shiver just a bit at the audible hunger in the Colonel's tone.